Dunkirk, the World War II movie directed by the greatest director of the 21st century, Christopher Nolan. Yes, I said it, greatest director of the 21st century. This will be the first of many hot takes in this review. You've been warned. Dunkirk tells the real-life story of the Dunkirk evacuation during the final days of the Battle of France during World War II. Now, I think most people are familiar with World War II, Nazis, Russians, Americans, Hitler dying in a movie theater. Everybody was really mad at each other. It was a bad time for the world, and really to be a citizen of the world. Our culture seems to be a bit obsessed with World War II. The world's most deadliest conflict has spawned literally hundreds of movies, and these films have given notoriety to some of the war's most famous and infamous battles. But the evacuation of Dunkirk is not as famous as, say, the invasion of Normandy. Let's face it, invasions are cooler than evacuations. Credit to Christopher Nolan. It's really hard to sell people on evacuations. Come out to the cinema and watch a group of people go from one place to another place. The main problem I usually have with Christopher Nolan and his movies is the dialogue. It tends to be a bit on the nose. Now, the end credits for Dunkirk begin with written and directed by Christopher Nolan. But it really should just say barely written. There's not a lot of dialogue in this movie. Nolan's not really laying anything out for the audience. There aren't many scenes with men in military uniforms actually discussing their plans. The events leading to the actual evacuation are presented out of chronological order, and since the dialogue is so sparse, you must pay attention to the smaller moments when the soldiers aren't running or, in this case, ducking for their lives. But there was nowhere to hide. The enemy was closing in every single day, and their backs were to the open ocean, the English Channel. There was nowhere to go. 400,000 men trapped on a beach with little chance of survival. Along with the logistics of the evacuations, most people are unfamiliar with the story of Dunkirk. And I'll tell you what, it might be the best tale that World War II has to offer. So, brief history lesson. On May 10th, 1940, Germany invaded France after already successfully invading Poland, Denmark, Norway, Belgium, and the Netherlands. The British government sent the British Expeditionary Force to aid in the defense of France, but by the 21st of May, the German forces had trapped the British, Belgian, and French armies along the northern coast of France. The Battle of France was essentially lost, so the British forces began planning an evacuation across the English Channel. What made the evacuation possible was a controversial halt order that was issued by the German High Command with approval by Adolf Hitler. Basically, the Germans didn't go in for the kill. This allowed the British, French, and Belgian armies to withdraw to Dunkirk. Now, why did Hitler halt his forces? I don't know, maybe he thought it'd make a good movie someday. Said Kenneth Branagh, I love his movies. This controversial decision also allowed the Allied forces to construct a defense along the mainland of France, while pulling back large numbers of troops to the beach of Dunkirk. And so the evacuation began. The biggest criticism I have seen of Dunkirk is the lack of characters and character development, that there's no one to root for or care about in this movie. That's ridiculous. You can still care about a character without learning their name and profession, especially if that character is a soldier. Do you really need to learn about a soldier's resume before you understand that they'd rather be anywhere in the world than on the battlefield? There's no time for character development in war. The enemy is constantly circling the Allied army like a group of vultures, dropping bombs from the air and launching torpedoes in the sea. The soldiers don't have a moment to breathe, let alone a moment to reflect on a life they may never return to. One of the soldiers doesn't even have time to take a shit. He was holding it in for the entire movie. Nolan has crafted a war movie not about victory, but about survival. This isn't a movie about winning or turning the tide of the war. This is a war movie about losing, something we aren't accustomed to seeing on the big screen. This is a story about the struggle for survival, losing and living to fight another day, turning your back on a lost cause while maintaining the hope for future victories. It's about the vigilance of the British, French, and Belgian soldiers who were faced with imminent destruction, yet somehow endured. In Dunkirk, the soldiers are fighting an abstract enemy. The German army is never referenced by name, only as the enemy. We don't see a single German soldier until the very end of the film, and the infamous Nazi swastika is nowhere to be found. Some of the best action sequences take place inside the cockpit of a couple of British Spitfires, who are locked in battle with German dive bombers. Yet there isn't a single close-up of a German pilot. Nolan is using a classic cinema scare tactic. You fear most the enemy you cannot see. From the perspective of the Spitfires and German bombers, the Allied soldiers look like ants, or as they're referred to by Kenneth Branagh's character, fish in a barrel waiting to be bombed. I personally feel the lack of dialogue and lack of focus on specific characters works really well for this story. It makes those smaller character moments more impactful. For example, the character played by Mark Rylance, the guy who stole Sylvester Stallone's Oscar, but, whatever. Mark Rylance, he's just a terrific actor, and he plays an average English citizen who feels it his duty to assist in the evacuations, along with a dozen other British citizens who are risking their lives for their country. And that's one of the best heroic moments I've ever seen in a movie. The merchant boats, the fishing boats, the lifeboats, the yachts, everyday civilians coming to the aid of their countrymen, and it's all true. They were known as the little ships of Dunkirk, 700 private boats sailed by men and women who weren't even soldiers. And that moment when Kenneth Branagh takes the binoculars and they say, "What is it?" and he says, "Home," and he gets teary-eyed. It's just a great moment of heroism. There's also moments of great personal tragedy, of course, in war, but you look at Cillian Murphy's character, who has become so shell-shocked by the German assault that he ends up accidentally killing a young boy who was assisting Mark Rylance and his son. The young boy joined them because he wanted to make a difference. He wanted to get into the local paper, make his dad proud. Instead of blaming Cillian Murphy's character for the young boy's death, Mark Rylance and his son, they lie to him. They tell him that the boy will live. This man has just committed manslaughter in front of them, yet these men allow him to carry on, hoping one day that he can become the man that he once was. Or even the French soldier who was pretending to be British so he can evacuate the island, always looking and scouting for a place to escape before the enemy can attack. And he actually shares one of the best scenes in the movie with Harry Styles, who was actually pretty good. Harry Styles confronts the French soldier as to why he never speaks. He even accuses him of being a German spy. Meanwhile, the German army is sniping at them in the distance while these Allied soldiers fight amongst themselves. And while he doesn't really say much, he's usually unintelligible in every movie he's in anyway. Tom Hardy gives a solid performance as the British pilot who is locked in battle for the majority of the film, and these are probably the most exciting moments of the movie. While watching Dunkirk, it almost feels like you're witnessing history unfold twice for the price of one. These stunning aerial sequences were shot by strapping IMAX cameras on the wings of real-life Spitfires. So Nolan is not only bringing these battles to life, but he's capturing shots that we've never seen before in the history of cinema. These 70mm IMAX cameras are behemoths. They're huge, they're heavy, they're loud, and they only shoot up to 3 minutes of film before you have to reload them. So most directors are reluctant to use them, but not Christopher Nolan. Nolan is a champion of the 70mm IMAX format because it offers audiences the highest picture resolution that you can find. It's the equivalent of 18,000 lines of digital resolution. You also have to admire Christopher Nolan's commitment to shooting with these IMAX cameras. His obsession with IMAX film began with The Dark Knight, when he shot the entire opening sequence in IMAX.
I believe whatever doesn't kill you simply makes you stranger.
He continued this trend in 2012 with the sequel to The Dark Knight Rises, which contains about 72 minutes of IMAX footage, including the opening scene. And his 2014 film Interstellar contains over 1 hour of IMAX footage. And now with Dunkirk, Nolan has shot 75% of the film using IMAX cameras. Granted, Dunkirk is Nolan's shortest film after his first film Following, but his decision to shoot the majority of Dunkirk in 70mm IMAX is unprecedented. Now, as for the whole debate between digital and film, listen, I'm not that passionate about it. If you stuck a gun to my head, I would say film. I don't know why you would do that, but some people are that crazy. They're that passionate about this argument that they would stick a gun to your head and say digital or film. I prefer film. I think it gives the movie a grittier, more realistic feel, especially a movie like Dunkirk, where Christopher Nolan, he calls it shooting in 70mm IMAX film. He called it virtual reality without goggles. And it's a very immersive experience. It's almost like physical media. I'm not somebody that's going to read a comic book on my Kindle. I want to feel the book. I want to flip through the pages. I want to smell the ink. It's just a preference. And I don't mind digital either. I mean, there's been plenty of movies shot on digital that look gorgeous, but there's just something about film that feels real. But listen, I'm not going to go crazy over it. Digital, film, whatever. I'm more concerned about Oreos and Chips Ahoy. I'm taking Chips Ahoy, and a close one. Dunkirk is the rare movie where the quality of the story can match the brilliance of its visuals, and Hoyt van Hoytema, who, this guy has shot some of the most gorgeous-looking films over the last couple of years. He shot Spike Jonze's 2013 film Her. He shot Interstellar, which to me is not a great movie, but it's a great-looking movie. It's a visual masterpiece. And same thing with Spectre, the James Bond movie that he shot. It looks terrific, but it's a pretty shitty movie. That's why you have to love Dunkirk, because the quality of its storytelling matches the cinematography. One is not weighing down the other, so you can definitely expect an Oscar nomination in his future, and Christopher Nolan too, who's never been nominated for an Oscar. How crazy is that? And here comes the one negative that I have for this movie. This is going to be a hot take, so, I mean, stop watching now if you can't take the hot takes. Hans Zimmer fucking sucks, dude. Oh my god, this score was atrocious. This is... Hans, I get it. I understand that this is a tense situation. You don't have to blah, blah. Everything is blah. I hate all of his scores. I hate the Inception score. I don't even like the Dark Knight score, and I love those movies. I just don't understand the obsession with this guy. I've never heard a score where I said, yeah, that's something I'll play by myself on a nice Sunday morning when I'm getting high in the backyard. This score was extremely obnoxious, and it wasn't building tension or making me nervous. It was taking me out of the movie. You need a score to build tension in a movie like this, and this just takes away from the moment. I think it's a credit to Christopher Nolan, too, because the movie's so good that the score isn't going to detract from my overall score of the film, which is a 10 out of 10. This is a great movie. Hans Zimmer sucks. Christopher Nolan is one of my favorite directors. The best of the 21st century. Please go see this movie on an IMAX screen. You will not regret it.